Before we dive in, tell me where you're listening from and what pulled you into this story. If it spoke to you, drop a comment. Your words help keep history's forgotten voices alive. The Forbidden City is quiet, but not at peace. Silk curtains sway in the night breeze, lanterns flicker against palace walls, and somewhere deep inside the imperial compound, a woman sits on the dragon throne. A throne carved for emperors, for sons of heaven, for men. No one in China's 4,000 years of history ever imagined a woman would sit there. No one believed the ministers would bow to her, or that generals would kneel before her word, or that an empire of 50 million people would be ruled by a woman who was never meant to rule at all. Her name is Wu Zetian, and her enemies call her a murderer, a seductress, a serpent who strangled China from within. But her supporters call her something else, the emperor who gave power not to bloodlines, but to talent. The ruler who expanded the empire while men struggled for relevance. The woman who forced China to confront the question it never dared ask. What if the most capable ruler alive happened to be female? History has a habit of hiding women like her behind whispers, legends, or horror stories, because the easiest way to erase a woman who gains power is to turn her into a villain. But Wu Zetian did not begin as a monster. She began as a girl no one expected to matter. Emperor Wu, the most dangerous woman China ever produced. The girl no one expected to remember. You start in the year 624, not in a palace, not in a royal cradle wrapped in gold, but in a house where daughters were supposed to be quiet, obedient, and temporary. A daughter was a burden, a mouth to feed, a future dowry to pay, a branch destined to be grafted onto someone else's family. No one looked at the infant Wu Meinyang, her childhood name, and thought, here sits the future emperor of China. But her father was unusual, a merchant, educated, well-read, loyal to the Tang dynasty and, most dangerous of all, willing to teach a girl to read. She is raised with books rather than dolls, surrounded by politics rather than embroidery. That changes everything, because once a girl learns how the world works, she starts to notice where it is weak. At 14, she is sent to the imperial palace as a fifth-rank concubine, a title that means ornament, not power. She arrives in a world built entirely to contain her. Endless corridors where women compete not with armies, but with beauty, alliances, tears, and rumor. The older concubines teach her the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look the emperor in the eyes. Your worth depends on whether you give birth to a son. Wu listens. But she's not here to survive. She's here to learn. She watches the palace the way a chess player watches a board, noting who rises, who falls, who speaks, who is silenced. She learns that power doesn't always belong to the strongest, the richest, or the most loved. Power belongs to whoever understands how decisions get made, and she studies that like scripture. The emperor at the time, Taizong, barely notices her. She is one of dozens. But another set of eyes lingers longer. The emperor's son, Prince Gaozong, a young man with a gentle disposition and a thin spine. History will say he fell in love with her. But what really happened is far more interesting. Wu Zetian recognized a man she could shape. When Taizong dies, the law demands that all of his unused concubines, and including Wu, be sent to a Buddhist convent, shaved-headed, cut off from the world forever. A woman removed from the emperor's bed was supposed to be removed from history. But Wu Zetian does something no woman before her ever dared. She comes back. She re-enters the palace not as a discarded concubine, but as a rising force, summoned into the arms and confidence of the new emperor, Gaozong. The palace whispers that she has violated tradition, decency, heaven itself. But the ministers do not stop her. The court ladies do not stop her. The emperor does not stop her, because power, she has already learned, does not belong to the rule followers. It belongs to the rule breakers who are smart enough not to get caught. She returns to the palace not as a girl, but as a strategist. And the next time she enters the emperor's private chambers, she enters as a woman who knows exactly what she wants and exactly how to get it. She has studied the throne from the shadows long enough. Now she is ready to step into the light. The concubine who rewrote the rules. When Wu Zetian returns to the palace, she does not return as a victim of fate. She returns as a woman who intends to bend fate until it breaks. She knows something no one else wants to admit. Power is not inherited, it is constructed. And no place in the empire proves that more brutally than the inner court, where women are not permitted to rule, yet every decision of state is shaped by the women who sleep closest to the emperor. Wu Zetian does not try to charm her way into favor. She builds her power the same way she studied it, through observation, through alliances, through precision. She remembers every insult, every rival, every weakness. She learns the names of eunuchs, maidservants, record-keepers, guards, all the invisible people who make the palace run but are never treated as dangerous. She treats them as weapons. The rise begins. Gaozong, the new emperor, is not like his father. Where Taizong was sharp, Gaozong is uncertain. Where Taizong ruled with strength, Gaozong rules with delegation, which means someone always has to stand behind him, guiding him. That someone becomes Wu Zetian. At first, she is only a favored consort. Then she becomes the emperor's confidant. Then she becomes indispensable. She drafts edicts. She advises on promotions. She sits in on councils unofficially, until ministers realize her words are being carried into policy with alarming frequency. And then she does something no one expects. She positions herself not as a mistress, but as a moral force. She donates to Buddhist temples. She funds orphanages. She hosts public rituals that portray her as a benevolent mother watching over both palace and people. Every speech, every gesture, every ceremony is designed to make her look not like a seductress, but like someone chosen by heaven. She does not try to imitate men. She creates a new model of rulership, one the empire is not prepared for. The rivals fall. There is, however, one problem. Gaozong already has a wife, Empress Wang, and a rival concubine, Xiao. Both women control official status. Both have support from aristocratic clans. Both believe Wu's rise is temporary. Wu Zetian does not confront them publicly. Instead, she turns their own weapons against them, rumors, alliances, and the most powerful tool in an imperial court, accusation. If the legends are true, she does it with a level of cold strategy that terrifies even modern historians. The story goes like this. Wu gives birth to a daughter. The child dies in infancy. Wu accuses Empress Wang of strangling the baby out of jealousy. Whether the story is truth, exaggeration, or propaganda crafted later, the result is undeniable. Wang falls. The emperor turns against her, and within months both Wang and Xiao are stripped of titles, imprisoned, and later executed. Their families lose everything. The empire watches and learns the first real lesson of Wu Zetian's rise. She does not defeat her enemies, she erases them. The co-ruler, not the favorite. By the time Wang is gone, Wu is no longer merely favored. She is empress. But unlike the empresses before her, she does not stop at the title. She begins signing documents in her own name. She sits behind the throne during state meetings. When Gaozong falls sick, headaches, dizziness, weakness, Wu steps in as regent, issuing decrees in his voice. Except everyone knows they are her words. Court officials protest behind closed doors, but no one protests aloud, because those who speak against her begin to disappear, demoted, exiled, executed, or mysteriously dead. She forms her own intelligence network, sometimes called the secret police, sometimes a mythic exaggeration. But either way, it works like a nervous system of loyalty and fear. Whispers in the palace begin to shift from "she is dangerous" to "she cannot be stopped." The most radical shift of all, then she does something history never forgave her for. She opens the civil service exams to men outside the aristocracy, scholars from poor families, intellectuals with no bloodline power. Suddenly the great clans lose control of government, and the new officials owe loyalty not to tradition, but to her. She doesn't just rise through the system, she rewrites the system so no one can shut the door behind her. And that is the moment historians mark as the point of no return, because emperors had always claimed heaven chose them. But Wu Zetian was the first to prove heaven could be outmaneuvered, the woman who took the dragon throne. When Emperor Gaozong dies, the officials expect the usual script: a grieving widow, a temporary regent, a son raised as the new ruler, the empire restored to its natural male order. But Wu Zetian has spent decades studying what happens when power is borrowed. She has no interest in being a background figure, no patience for being remembered in footnotes, no intention of surrendering what she built just so a boy with the right bloodline can undo it. So she does what no woman in China had ever done, and no man ever imagined a woman could do. She declares herself emperor, not empress, not dowager, not mother of the heir. Emperor, ruler of China in her own right, head of a new dynasty, the Zhou. At 67 years old, she doesn't just shatter a ceiling, she shatters an entire cosmology. Confucian scholars choke on their ink, court officials panic, aristocrats whisper rebellion. But the people, the farmers, the scholars who rose because she opened the exams to commoners, they don't revolt, because while the palace plots, the empire prospers. The empire expands under Wu Zetian. China strengthens its borders and advances militarily into Central Asia. Trade grows, roads improve, diplomats are sent farther than ever before. Foreign leaders treat her not as an anomaly, but as a powerhouse. She sends generals who respect her. She promotes officers based not on bloodline, but on competence. Her enemies say she only held power by force. Her supporters say men before her held power the same way. They were just allowed to. She builds a government based on talent, not birth. She rewrites the civil service exam system, the same one that would shape China for 1,000 years after her death. Thousands of low-born scholars rise into government because she allows them to. To the aristocratic clans, this is treason. To history, it is revolution, disguised as paperwork. She chooses Buddhism over Confucianism. Confucianism says women must obey men. Buddhism says all beings can reach enlightenment. So Wu Zetian promotes Buddhist temples, scripture, art, and public works. She uses religion not as faith, but as political architecture. And Buddhist monks repay her with something priceless, a narrative of cosmic approval. Texts appear calling her an incarnation of the Maitreya, a future Buddha. If men were chosen by heaven, then she was chosen by eternity. The crimes history will never forgive. But the higher she rises, the darker the methods become. She purges aristocratic families who oppose her. She executes ministers who plot against her. She exiles princes, even her own sons, when they threaten the throne. A secret police force emerges, loyal to her alone. Accusation becomes execution. Dissent becomes treason. Fear becomes law. And here lies the great divide. If a man had done this, he would be called a strong ruler. But she is called the most evil woman in Chinese history. So which is true? Was she a tyrant? Was she a visionary? Or was she simply a woman playing by the same rules men wrote wide and beating them at their own game? History likes to pretend Wu Zetian rose alone. But the truth is far more brutal. She did not just fight ministers, scholars, generals, and aristocratic clans. She fought her own children. Because the greatest threat to a woman in power is not her enemies. It is the heirs waiting to replace her. The crown prince who challenged her. Her first son, Li Hong, was brilliant, educated, respected, and worst of all, independent. He admired his mother, but he did not obey her. He pushed for reforms she didn't approve of. He questioned decisions she made. In a palace where disobedience equals death, independence is treason. At age 24, the prince suddenly fell ill and died. Court rumors whispered poison. Official records blamed illness. Historians still debate whether she killed him or whether rivals framed her to weaken her rule. But whether she did it or not, the message was clear. The throne was not inherited from Wu Zetian. It would be inherited through her, or not at all, the second son who opposed her rule. Her next son, Li Xian, tried to overthrow her. He gathered allies. He resisted her decisions. He dared to voice what others only muttered. A woman cannot rule China. He was exiled, stripped of titles, erased from portraits, removed not just from the palace, but from the story. And this is where the narrative always gets twisted. When male emperors kill sons to protect the throne, history calls it dynastic stability. When Wu Zetian removes a son threatening the throne, history calls it unnatural violence, the son who lived because he didn't fight her. In the end, the son who became emperor after her death wasn't the smartest or the strongest. He was simply the one who didn't challenge her. Li Dan, quiet, moderate, obedient, a man who waited rather than rebelled and survived because of it. He owed his crown to her. He repaid her by helping erase her legacy, because even the son who benefited from her power had to distance himself from the idea that a woman could ever legitimately hold it. The paradox of power. Under her rule, China's borders expand, the economy stabilizes, education opens to more people than ever, art, poetry, and printing flourish. Buddhism reaches its peak influence, crime rates fall, corruption is punished fiercely, and yet every achievement is followed by a whisper, yes, but she was a woman who killed to get there. The question her era couldn't answer, and ours still can't, is simple. Can a woman be powerful without being punished for it? The monster they needed to invent. A woman ruling China was already unthinkable. A woman ruling it successfully was unforgivable. The moment Wu Zetian took the dragon throne, the historians of her age, all men, all Confucian, all trained to believe that women were biologically unfit to lead, began writing the story they wanted remembered, not the story that actually happened. They could not erase her reign. So they did something more powerful. They rewrote her into a warning. The beginning of the backlash. When Wu Zetian was young, ambition looked like brilliance. When she was middle-aged, ambition looked like strategy. When she grew old, ambition was rebranded as madness. The same ministers who bowed to her for decades now murmured about omens, illness, loss of heaven's favor. Pamphlets spread in secret, calling her a demon in silk, a murderer of sons, a corrupter of the natural order. The irony? Most of the crimes attributed to her happened under male rulers too. Assassination, purges, torture, executions. But when men did it, the record called it necessary force. When Wu Zetian did it, the record called it female wickedness. The stories that survived were the ones designed to shame her. After her death, scholars wrote that she killed her baby daughter, that she poisoned her mother, that she forced her husband's empress into mutilation, that she slept with monks and made them ministers, that she murdered every family member who stood between her and power. Maybe some of it is true, maybe some of it is propaganda, but history does not care about truth as much as it cares about narrative. And for 1,000 years, the narrative was this: a woman who gains power must be a monster. The blank tombstone. When Wu Zetian finally dies, she is not dragged from the throne. She is not assassinated, she is not executed. She dies peacefully in silk, surrounded by attendants, exactly like the emperors before her. But the men who succeed her do one last thing to reclaim control. They bury her beside her husband, and they leave her tombstone blank. No name, no title, no inscription, because to write Emperor Wu in stone would mean admitting that a woman once ruled China, not as a widow, not as a mother, not as a puppet, but as sovereign. So they tried to replace her with silence. But silence did not erase her. It just made the question louder. Was she one of the greatest rulers China ever had, or the most dangerous woman its patriarchy ever faced? Death, erasure, and the afterlife of power. When Wu Zetian dies in 705, China does not crumble. There is no uprising, no civil war, no divine curse raining fire from the heavens. The empire continues. The roads she paved still traveled, the examinations she reformed still taken, the officials she promoted still governing, which is exactly why history had to destroy her. Because if she had ruled poorly, her story would have been simple. See what happens when a woman takes power? Never again. But she ruled well. Too well. And that meant one thing: her existence was a threat not just to the past, but to the future. Erasure as a political strategy. Within months of her death, the Zhou dynasty she created is abolished and the Tang dynasty restored. Ministers rewrite records, scribes destroy documents that praise her, statues of her are removed, officials who once served her now swear they always hated her. The Confucian scholars who shape China's official history adopt a new mission: rewrite Wu Zetian not as a ruler, but as a warning. Her accomplishments are minimized, her brutality is amplified, her intelligence is reinterpreted as manipulation. Her political skill is reframed as seduction. To admire her becomes treason, to defend her becomes blasphemy. 1,000 years later, she is still called poisonous woman, dragon witch, concubine tyrant, the woman who murdered her own child, the seductress who ruled through lust and blood. But buried under the propaganda are the things China could not erase. She was the first ruler to promote people based on talent, not family name. She expanded the empire more successfully than 3 emperors before her. She stabilized the economy, cut corruption, reduced taxes, and protected peasants. She gave more poor families access to education and government positions than any ruler in centuries. She turned China into a global power in diplomacy, religion, and trade. The men who came after her kept many of her reforms. They simply erased her from the credit. The blank stone becomes a mirror. Her tomb still exists today, massive, silent, guarded by stone animals carved into a mountainside alongside her husband. But her tablet remains smooth and unmarked, as if the empire could not decide how to speak her name. It is the most eloquent silence in world history. Because a blank epitaph is not a mistake, it is a confession. They could not praise her. They dared not condemn her. So they chose to pretend she never existed. But history has a flaw. It leaks. Modern scholars reopen the records. Women reclaim her story. China, centuries later, quietly restores her to museum walls and textbooks. Not as a saint, not as a monster, as a ruler. A ruler who did what thousands of men did, but paid a price only a woman ever pays. To rise is unnatural. To succeed is unforgivable. And so the question returns, not whispered this time, but spoken aloud. Was Wu Zetian cruel because she was a woman in power? Or was she called cruel because she held power? History may never decide, but the blank stone over her grave says everything. She filled the space they said she could never enter, and left a silence they can never explain. When modern scholars revisit Wu Zetian, the question is no longer whether she killed rivals, purged enemies, or used fear as a political tool. Lots of rulers did that. The question is this: was she a tyrant because she was a woman in power, or was she called a tyrant because she was a woman in power? Men in her era killed sons, murdered brothers, strangled rivals, burned cities, executed thousands, and were still called wise emperors, brave conquerors, sons of heaven. But when a woman did it, she wasn't just judged. She was condemned, erased, and rewritten as a monster. Because if a woman can rule as well as a man, or better than a man, then the hierarchy collapses. The fear isn't that Wu Zetian was cruel. The fear is that she was effective. China grew stronger under her rule. Art flourished, education expanded, government modernized. She built systems so durable that men kept them after she died. She was not a crack in China's power structure. She was proof the structure was never as natural as it claimed, which is why her tombstone is blank. Not because they didn't know what to write, but because they knew anything they wrote would make her real. And remembering her, truthfully, would mean confronting the one question every empire fears. What if the only thing unnatural about a woman ruling was the fact that she succeeded? As the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to whisper, we close the pages of this ancient tale. In the hush of night, truth rests where faith once stood strong. Sleep gently now, wrapped in the echoes of empires long gone. Until next time, when darkness falls and another lullaby of a fallen world begins.